Hey, one of the things that seems to be very important in a systematic review is knowing your rationale and having identified the gap in literature. And that is what we're going to be dealing with in this session. So remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's go.
In the course of today's our session here, if you're listening to us, it's going to be a very smooth experience on how you can actually identify gap in research. And we're going to just have a slight touch of our search strategy, because for you to literally identify the gap in research, you need a strategy. You need a strategy, and it's very pertinent. In short, as a matter of fact, what is going to play a massive role in your ability to identify gap is how you've shaped your paradigm, which is what we've already discussed, because some people might be positivists, some people might be interpretivists, some people might be shaping their thoughts from the point of critical realism. But it means that is going to inform how you want to quote that the unknown is it. As such, in research, what we're looking at is we're trying to just do the unknown. We're trying to examine the unknown. We're trying to say that this is the unknown, and we can now fill the gaps of the unknown. That is just it. And we're going to massacre this session and make it very simple. So what's going to be what's going to be our outline for this session? So first of all, we're going to look at gaps. What is gaps in literature? Right? We need to understand what gaps means. Then we're now going to explain systematic review research gap. Right? Then we'll now explain what is rationale, because gaps in literature and rationale works hand in glove. They work hand in glove. And the pertinence of this series is just to make it very, very simple for us to be able to know, okay, why do I not want to do this? Since I've now been able to identify that gap. That is just it. Then we're now going to look at some of the considerations in gap identification. So what I call the winning approach in research. How do we now know if this is going to be the most suitable approach for you to be able to realize your gap? Because literally we ask a lot of questions every day, and these questions that we ask are questions that are seeking answers, and some of these questions are questions that has not been asked before. So what we just literally want to do is to ask these questions and now justify why are we asking these questions. We're going to have a very clear dummy of what this is all about. And now I'm going to use what I call the tabulation approach, where I'm going to clearly explain in details how you can identify gaps, because most times as researchers, we find it very difficult to identify gap in literature. What is gap in literature is that you want to look at a research question, and upon staring upon that research question, you're seeing 21,000 things that has not been done. That is gap in literature. You're looking at a question and you're seeing over 56,000 things that has not been done. Those are gaps in literature, right? So it's now all about justifying why you should why you should address those questions. That is where rationale now comes into play. And for us to be able to identify those gaps, we need a little bit of knowledge of what search strategy, because that's going to be very fundamental in identifying your gap. Then where do we move from here? Where do we now move from here after we've identified the gap? That is where the practicals now comes into play. So if you're listening to us, this is just going to be one of those basic but very tactical aspects of research that we literally find it very difficult to conduct. But trust me, at the very end of this session, it's going to be something very phenomenal, because literally you would understand all the units and all the basis of ticking your boxes for you to be able to come up with a very better research. And that is just what it's going to be. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there has never been any tabulation approach or objective process towards identifying your research gap. It's what most PhD supervisors or most academics have always advised their students is just to review literature. They ask them to review literature, but nobody asks them to take a very better approach in identifying gap in literature. And then this is where the problem comes up. And you find out that people end up struggling with it. So this is where we're going to start. So as usual, my graphics has actually been very comical. I like very comical graphics. So what is it? So this is just it. You move from paradigm, your paradigm. Remember that your paradigm, in our last session, we explained paradigm as what is your ontology? How do you draw? How do you view reality? And what is your epistemology? How do you now study knowledge? That's going to be your paradigm, right? So that has a very large role to play in your gap identification, because gap identification is that we have a hand fan. We had the hand fan in 1951, and sometime in 1998, the electric, or what I call the ceiling fan, came into existence to fill the gap that the hand fan was having. And now, sometime in 2011, we have an air conditioner, and now sometime in 2024, we have a split unit air conditioner that now functions very well. All these are all equipment and tools that are used in making the humans, or making people food, or making people to feel a bit comfortable in a very hot weather. But when you look at some of the changes, you find out that these are just new inventions filling existing gaps, developing the unknowns that makes it literally very possible. So without wasting much of our time, we need to understand what is gap. So when we mention the word gap, we just literally know what we have in mind is a holo, something that is missing. So you just have a look at this young boy with this puzzle, and you find out that there are a lot of spaces out there that needs to be filled by all this. So all these puzzles that are out here are the unknown that we used to do what? Fill up these places. So gap is just like an area or topic, an area or any topic within a field or study where existing research is incomplete. So if we say that COVID-19 is going to be managed using maybe Zidovin or any type of therapy, right? Then it means that there are still some limitations. There are still some therapies that need to be tested. So the absence of those studies means that there is gap in literature. So it means that literally when those studies are not being conducted, you find out that we're trying to fill those gaps. But then somebody can be asking, can all the gaps in literature be filled? Yeah, I think that's practically a no, because once there are new insights, gaps are being created. The invention of modern contraceptive methods, like the use of barrier methods, like, okay, let's say condoms, maybe provided gaps that it's still possible that humans can actually have that full pleasure without putting on a condom, right? And still not have with maybe unwanted pregnancy or infectious disease. That could be where the pre-exposure prophylaxis and other form of therapies could come in as drugs. Maybe take it in, can actually have raw sex and still not have sexually transmitted disease. But now, does it end that way? No. Now, with that coming in, it still creates more further gaps, because there could still be somewhat other problems that comes up that needs questions to answer. So your research gap is just those questions that we want to ask to things that are not yet known. And that's it. So identify these gaps will help us direct future effort, and also helps to close areas where there needs to be further investigation. So for this child, it's just like this big puzzle that is there. So it's just you notice that there are some missing pieces out there. So those empty spaces there are the gaps in research. So this is actually a very funny picture of a man that is trying to cover to maybe what sort of seems like a bridge. He's trying to, create a bridge. We can say bridge that gap in research. Sometimes we use that word. You want to bridge the gap in research. So that's practically what he's trying to do. So we now start asking the question, what's now a systematic review gap? So it becomes very simple, right? Because if we're going to say the normal gap is what's unknown, and that means in terms of a systematic reviews, there exists to be somewhat unknowns. So a systematic review gap is just those areas where reviewed literature or where evidence is either missing, or there's a limitation, or there's something that is contradictory, right? Remember, here we're not just saying something that has not been done. Maybe something has been done, but there is still conflict. And that means there is gap. Let's say, for example, we have about 10 studies that are reporting the management measures for diabetes among adults in sub-Saharan Africa. And 10 studies are reporting several measures, right? This one is reporting metformin, the other one is reporting glyburide, the other one is reporting tetracycline, the other one is reporting maybe some other forms of sodium inhibitors. And these are just several. So it's not, we won't really say there are gaps in literature in terms of management of diabetes, but there is kind of contradictory. So that means the systematic review gap now is there because we need to now combine, pull all those evidence and try to close the gap to say that, this is what we've got. And this is the area that we can actually address. So that is what we mean when we talk about what systematic review gap. So for a child, it's just like just reading a bunch of books about dinosaurs, and you notice that none of the books talk about how fast they could run. So you've just read a bunch of books, and there's a particular missing information that you really want to get. So that means you need to now review lots of books to know if there is evidence about how fast dinosaurs can actually run. So that's what a systematic review gap happens to be. So I try to make it very comical, to make it very, very simple while we practice. So when we talk about gap in literature, in research, there are some certain areas we usually explore gap in literature. We look at what we call the evidence gap. Now we try and examine what we call the knowledge gap. We look at the practical knowledge gap, look at the methodological gap, the empirical gap, theoretical gap, and population gap. Now, we're going to have a more detailed explanation of this with an underlining practical, right? Because when you're trying to examine the gap in literature, you're looking at it from several standpoints. You're looking at it from in terms of methodology. Is there any other study that has used another approach? So, for example, several of the studies have addressed the same topic, but so many of them have used cross-sectional study. That means there is gap. So that means if we can use a cohort study to explore this particular topic, it is likely that we might have a different conclusion, right? So that means there is gap in literature existing there. So that is just what we are talking about in this scenario. And we'll have a more detailed look at all this. Now we've talked about gap in literature. Now how about rationale? How do we now talk about our rationale? Now, when we talk about rationale, another name we can use is justification. Now, if you're an early career researcher out there and you're trying to do your research, one thing is very paramount, and that is what? Your rationale. You can't literally start writing any systematic review without having a clear rationale. Right, so for the sake of this video, of this session, we are going to demonstrate with practical. I'm going to write out a rationale for our research, and we are definitely going to see how to put it down and make it very simple, right? So the rationale is just like, why do we need to do this systematic review and not another topic? Why this topic? That is just it. It is not just about the systematic review. Why this particular systematic review topic? So just try to explain the importance of the review, reasons for focusing on specific aspects, and what's anticipated. For a child, it's just like choosing a new game to play. Why have you picked this particular game? So just tells everybody, why do you think this systematic review is the best choice, and why is it important for you to play right now? So we're going to actually explain this because this is actually a fundamental part of your review. I believe that by the end of this session, we will have a working title and we've got to practice with, because for you to get any acceptance in any journal, you really need to convince them why that your review is relevant. Because if you don't have a reason why your review is relevant, you might not get acceptance. In short, your review has to be, the rationale for your review has to be very solid. In short, it has to be very solid, supported by telling us about the problem, why do you really need to do this review, and that's just it. Then why do you need acceptance? Why not the other one? What is novel about your topic? What gap have you identified that it's now making you want to do this topic? In short, these are actually the nitty-gritties that we look out to in writing our what systematic review rationale. And that way our review happens to do it, stand out. So it starts getting interesting here, because we now need to know what to consider in identifying the gaps in literature in our systematic review. Now, many a times we struggle in this particular aspect because we have it in mind that, we have a particular variable in mind. For example, I could say, okay, I have teenage pregnancy in mind, or I have pregnancy in mind. That is what I want to study. I'm interested in pregnancy. That is the problem I have in mind. Now, how can I be able to address this as a problem? How can I be able to identify pregnancy as a problem? Or how can I identify gaps in research around pregnancy as a maternal complication? Yeah, because it's a maternal problem. In as much as it's a very good thing, it's seen as a health problem, right? At some degree. Now, if I'm interested in the problem pregnancy, and now looking at that term alone, I can actually identify 265,000 gaps in literature. Not just gaps, I could say I can actually identify 500,000 topics around it. Now, how I could now say that there is gap is when I now search for literature and comment on them using what I call the gap identification worksheet. There's something I call the gap identification worksheet, which I'm going to demonstrate here. Then I can now say that, yes, that there is gap in for this particular specific title that I have chosen. Now, how do we move ahead with this? Now, looking at this part of the lecture, which is consideration and identify gaps. Now, how do we identify gaps in literature? There are several thousands of criteria that we look out to in identification of gap. Now, in terms of population, maybe that topic is related to pregnant, maybe it's related to another sort of population. I can try to look at it from another view. Now, have we looked at pregnant women? Have we looked at adult women? Have we looked at HIV positive adolescents, or HIV positive women, or HIV positive pregnant women, or a lot of things, or women of childbearing age, or pediatrics, or adults 18 to 50, or adults 90 to 100, or adults 200 to 500, or adults 10 to 50, whatever, adults 18 and above, adults 34 to 50. Have we looked at it from the nurses' perspective? Have we looked at it from depressed nurses? Have we looked at it from immigrants, children, diabetics, adults? Adults diagnosed with diabetes at age 40 is different from diabetic adults, remember. Now, late fetal stage mothers, university students, age 20 to 30 is different from just university students. So it's different from university students age 30 and above, secondary school. So a lot of them that were not captured here, right? And so many of them. So when we want to identify gaps in literature, what are we trying to say? When we pick up the population, we need to look at that question from a lot of angles. And we see that we identified some of the unknowns. Remember that when we started this session, we made it clear that gaps in literature, it is clearly the unknowns, those unknowns that we are yet to see. So those are the things that identifies as as gap in our literature. So apart from population, what are other considerations that we need to put up for identification of gaps? Is intervention. So it can be anything. It can be beyond what I've projected here. It could be dietary supplements, physical exercise programs, new drugs can come into antiretroviral therapy, metformin, glyburide, paracetamol, whatever drug you want to put it. Exercise could be specific, much more, lots of them. It could be cognitive behavioral therapy. It could be mood therapy. It could be what we call, there's something we call dog therapy, animal-assisted therapy for depressed people, only here in terms of intervention. It could be vaccination programs. It could be surgical procedures, health education campaigns, mindfulness, meditation, digital health intervention, telemedicine, consultation, rehabilitation programs, lifestyle interventions and changes, alternative therapies. mobile health applications, community initiatives, a lot of things, public health programs, anything you want to call it, could come inside your what? Your intervention. And that means with only the knowledge of these two, because primarily when we are making our search, we usually use the population and intervention or problem, right? Those are the things that actually have a very large role to play in our what? In our search. Because for you to formulate your gap, the next thing is to do what? Do a proper search. Do a proper search. And that proper search is going to culminate your what? Your ability to now dig deep into literature and see what has not yet been what? Been done. So other considerations are location. Now everything could be the same, but now there is no location. Now remember, you have to note down all these, because when we start the practicals talking about the commenting on the literature, we need to see that location can play a massive role in our what gap. In terms of urban hospitals, it could still go further down in details. We talk about rural clinics, community health centers, schools, universities, home settings, workplaces, residential care. This could actually have names, so it could come with names. It could be somewhere in Tanzania, somewhere in India, somewhere in China, in Ayazumbise of Imo State, in somewhere in Usman Danfodio in Sokoto, anywhere. It can be any sort of location. It could be in a religious setting, in IDP camps, maybe anywhere. It could be in a church, it could be in an Islamic setting, whatever thing can be your what? Your study setting. So these are refugee camp, Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Mexico, Egypt, Nigeria, thousands of. In short, what point I'm trying to make is that when you identify your systematic review gaps, all these considerations play a massive role. So, like I said, when people are struggling with, oh, I cannot identify the topic, oh, I can look at a certain word, only one topic, and I can identify 575,000 undone topics on it. Because when I play around these considerations, right, you see a lot of things that has not yet been done. You see the unknown a lot of places. And this is the problem we have with a lot of researchers, because they find it very difficult to do what? To do their search. Now, we can also have that considerations in terms of our outcomes, right? So it could be based on symptoms, quality of life, mortality rate, patient satisfaction, adherence. Could be other areas that you can be looking at when you're trying to say, oh, this health, what was conducted in Mr. X study was based on quality of life. Now it's still in the same setting, it's still the same population, it's still the same intervention, but now I'm going to focus it on what? Mortality rate. That means you've identified the gap. You want to focus now on what? Mortality rate. That shows how brilliant you seem to be, and you want to do what? Explore literature from another what? Dynamics. Now, another popular aspect of it is what we call the study design, right? Because along the line, when we'll be performing our meta-analysis sometime in November, you will find out that if we are to do an effect of intervention meta-analysis, like most of the included studies might be randomized trials, right? And that means it's possible that we can now identify a gap in our systematic review and meta-analysis and say, okay, no. We want to do a meta-analysis of what? Cohort studies. Or rather than doing meta-analysis, we want to focus it on maybe pilot studies or feasibility studies or meta-analysis of observational studies, what we call the MOOSE, MOOSE, right? So those are some of the things we are going to take a very clear look at on the very course of this series. And also remember earlier on when I projected some of the core gap method, I said something about methodological gap, right? So it could be that it's a qualitative systematic review, but at this point you want to do exact same topic, but you want to use a quantitative approach. And that was why it was very imperative for us to have a session on paradigms in research, because these paradigms play a very massive role in how we direct and shape our thoughts in refining our research question. So it could be mixed methods, it could be surveys, it could be interviews, focus groups, observational techniques, experimental setups, and all that, right? Good. Now, another thing we actually look into could be what? Our comparison group. So I can do a systematic review on the effectiveness of maybe antiretroviral therapy compared with metformin among HIV patients Now, the gap I can actually identify can be same topic, effectiveness of antiretroviral topic, antiretroviral therapy compared with now placebo among HIV patients. So same outcome, same everything, different comparator. That creates a gap. So it is just easy. It is just literally easy, right? So everything could be the same but different what duration of study. So this is also another consideration that we put in. So there are still other areas where we need to look at, particularly when it's not really focused on the quantitative research question, such as the PICO framework, right? So what are other considerations that we could make in terms of our gap identification? It could be based on health condition, maybe the study is focused on diabetes, you want to explore another part of it, probably cancer, heart issue, heart disease, musculoskeletal disorder. It could be a lot of things, right? Or it could be maybe change of participants. What I could also call here the healthcare providers. You look at the workplace violence among nurses. You want to do it among doctors, or maybe doctors can still be delimited. So it could also be based on the cultural context, right? Where you can look at it from various settings. You could also look at, which can also sometimes serve as, it could serve as maybe your population and all that. And you could also look at it as barriers and facilitators, right? Access to care, financial constraints, cultural beliefs, language barriers, health literacy support, and all that. Okay. So we've got others such as policy and practice. So we can actually identify gaps because of regulatory frameworks, maybe what was explored here. Just the idea is that these considerations are just designed to maybe let us know, oh, this has been done here. Okay, let's do this or that things here. And that's just it. And also, it also be in terms of duration, maybe it was conducted in the last 10 years, 2014, 2015. Maybe sometimes it could be the same research topic, but you want to now provide an update. That's what we call it. Maybe something that was published in 2012, you want to provide an update. So that's the gap in literature. So meaning that when you conduct it now in 2024, it's possible that the result might change. Remember that the idea of gap is that there is something unknown. So regardless of the fact that it has been conducted before, but because of time duration, you want to look at it from a more recent perspective and then practically get everything in order. So there are also other areas where we can look at some of the measurement tools. This is something that is very synonymous with primary studies, right? When you've done a primary study using questionnaire, and the gap is that you feel like when you use a focus group checklist or when you use a qualitative approach, you might actually get a different result. So, and nobody has done it, so that means try and do it. So that's it. Also, another one is theoretical frameworks. Literally, we're trying to look at it through several theories, and that's just it. Now, this brings us to the point of having a practical on how we can start our gap identification process, right? And this is what I call the tabulation approach for research gap, where we record the study author, title / the objective, the type of population. Well, what you need to understand is that the columns you find here is largely dependent on the nature of your paradigm. And so if you're coming from a qualitative standpoint and you want to use a table, you want to use the tabulation approach to record some of the studies or some couple of things that you want to do, then it implies that you have to direct your columns as it suits your question, right? That's one common thing we have in systematic review, particularly in our results, what we call the data extraction. The data extraction looks this way. This is how it looks like. And what you realize is that data extraction framework makes it way relatively easy for you to understand the characteristics of the studies that you're going to include. And that is not different. That's not far-fetched from some of the studies you want to peep into before you know that, that what you want to do is now new, or what you want to do has been conducted in Kenya. It has not been conducted in Nigeria, meaning that it shows a gap in Nigeria. Remember when we talked about study settings. So we're going to just have a demonstration of these 2-3 lines of recording, and we are just there. So this brings us into practice. It's not our tags, and that is just it. To be able to identify our gap. Now, before I continue, I'm going to make it very clear that we're going to talk about the Boolean search operator, right? And what the Boolean search operator entails is that it just tries to, this is just the basic syntax we would look at from the Boolean operator, because the OR operator is just going to help us separate spelling variants within the same. So it's going to help us separate terms within the same spelling variant. So for example, I want to choose mangoes, right? So I'm interested in mangoes that are yellow or mangoes that are green. That is the OR, right? Or I'm interested in oranges or mangoes. So it means that if I hit my search term, it's going to yield either oranges or mangoes. So I'm going to get more larger terms, right? And if I'm going to use the AND Boolean operator, I'm going to also explain that the AND Boolean operator is going to yield specific terms. So it's used to combine such terms within different spelling variants when you want to combine oranges and mangoes. So it means that the articles must contain oranges and also contain what? Mangoes, compared to this where there are 2 baskets, either oranges or mangoes. Either oranges or mangoes. But this one, it must contain both oranges and mangoes. So that is where the AND Boolean operator comes in. Now, so I'm going to take us on an exercise quickly. Now, before I start there, I have already come up with, okay, I've set our gap identification worksheet, which I'm going to use to perform very small practical of our search. But then I think from our next session forward is now filled with practicals, where we're talking about search strategy, data extraction, introducing us to several frameworks like the Prisma, we'll introduce us to how to use some of the data extraction from glycovidence, Ryan, and all that, right? So for the sake of this session at this point, would I'm going to choose a research question, right? So I'm interested in pregnancy. Now, this is where we all meet. So you can be interested in anything. I'm interested in COVID-19 or whatever thing. So I'm going to zoom it so to make it more clear. So I'm interested in pregnancy, right? Now the question now is, how do I identify the gap? Now, before we came to this session, we made it clear that we should make our search strategy scenario, right? We should make it specific. And already I gave us an assignment, I gave us an assessment where I also explained that we've got to go back and get our, work on formulate our questions or our intended question using a certain model. So let me assume I'm going to be interested in the PEO framework, right? So I want to be sure that I'm going to cut this table here somewhere. Okay, good. Okay, so now let's assume I have now we're going to use the PEO framework. So my P, I'm interested in teenagers. My E, I'm interested in okay. Now, but let's assume this didn't exist, right? So how are we going to start navigating for gaps? So looking for gaps around pregnancy alone might be very taxing. So what will you do? So you come on here, you come to the internet, you search. So you search PubMed, right? So there's something we call mesh terms, but I'm going to explain that in our next session. So I'm going to explain what we mean by mesh terms and all that. So for now, let me just use right? Good. Now, 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 there's something I want to say. Now, if you see the results for pregnancy is 3 million results, right? If you search it on preg here, you're getting what? A million what? Results. And here you're getting what? 3 million what? Results. Why here is what? A million and something results. You wouldn't want to be screening a million and something results, right? So that means what you need to do is to using the considerations that we have explained here on our what on the slides, right? All you need to do is to do what? Narrow your question down. We have already explained how to use the what? A framework and a model to get yourself a what? A specified what? Research question. So what that implies is that what? You need to do what? Have yourself you could hook yourself up with a what? With a specified what? Question, right? So yeah, I'm going to say, oh, teenagers in Nigeria is what I've got in mind. I've got pregnancy, or maybe adolescent pregnancy, right? So I've got determinants, right? Good. Now this is where I've built my search to save us of more time. Before we come there, right? Because the point I was making now is if you want to identify, remember, you can identify the gap. Let me make it very clear. You can identify gap in literature using any type of search term. But some of the considerations we put in while you're identifying gaps is what? Time. Time is because when you use only the term pregnancy to identify gaps, you tells me you in programming we call it loop. You will keep on looping and looping and looping because what it means now is that with that term pregnancy, it is not enough because you might need to search with the what? With the mesh terms of pregnancy. What we call mesh terms. When you come here, you go down here to mesh database, you click on mesh database, you come here, you click pregnancy, you search it, right? So pregnancy has how many mesh terms? It has about several mesh terms, about 12 mesh terms. Okay, so yes, I was trying to put it. So pregnancy has about 12 mesh terms, right? So I'm going to pick it up here, 9, 8. Then I'm going to go up. This is just. Then you mark 2, 3, right? Then I'll put. Oh, sorry. I just made a mistake. You separate with all. Then you add all of them to the search, then search, right? So when you search it on PubMed, right, the same thing I got, almost 1 million and down that, right? Good. So now, what point am I trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is that you have to make your searching very specific, right? So that, because if you're not trying to identify the gap for pregnant, that means you're going to record a lot of times. When you open this paper now, right, and let's say, for example, the title, this is Shiva et al. 2024. You come to your gap identification sheet. You come here, you put it. Right? Okay. It was conducted in what? 2024. The title. That means you have to download the full paper, right? You've got lots of paper to read, right? So you put in the title of this paper here. Put in the title, you put in the type of population, maybe pregnant women and all that, right? And you see that will you have to review 1 million papers to now know what is not in existence? That's going to take a whole lot of time. So what point am I trying to make is that before you start recording your studies, particularly if you're doing a PhD or whatever thing, right? You need to narrow down your title. So this is the gap search build-up, which I'm still going to use in explaining the search strategy, but it's more of me now explaining it twice. So here, I'm going to come here now. Now this is the question I have in mind, right? What are the determinants of teenage pregnancy? Determinants of teenage pregnancy in Nigeria. So the problem, we've got adolescents, teenage pregnancy, exposure. Determinants is what represent my outcome. So now I'll put in my keywords here, adolescents, mesh. So I'm going to explain how I literally did all this, right? So let me pick up this. So I'm interested in this, like I said. So I'm going to come to tray, mesh terms. So just a very short search build-up. Remember, I'm not really going to be explaining so much on search strategy today because we'll be talking about it in length in our next session. So I think I'm going to hover around there because of our time and pick up this, right? And I'll come to PubMed. So close this. Right, so this is just, no, not here. We'll go to advanced. So this is where we build our search, right? We build our search what's here. So if I come here, sorry, and I put my this, I'm not going to put add with what, or rather I'll put here and add. So I put it add with or. So this is where we'll do what? Where we'll build our search. I'm going to explain all this. But now, what is the idea behind this session? Before I start explaining this entire search strategy, the entire idea now is that for we to be able to identify our gaps in literature here, be able to record our gaps here, right? Because here the possible question has already been formulated. Let me put it in the search box, and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it here when I identify it. Now, what am I trying to say? The idea is that when we have, remember that this session was followed in a very systematic manner and systematic approach, which means we must have understood our paradigm. We must have been able to formulate our, at least, we should have been able to at least have a specific or something specific in mind before we will now identify if that is actually in existence or not. So to make it more simpler and more easier for us, this is the question, right? So I'm just going to use our scholar to pick up articles and record reasons in our gap identification worksheet. So yeah, I'm just going to put this here, right? So when I open up this first article, right, what do I have of interest here? I'm interested in this. Remember, I want to perform a systematic review, and this approach also helps us to be sure that we've got studies, right? So I'm going to pick up that first study. Then I will record the title here. So you can adjust this table as much as you want. Let me go back here so I'll be able to pick up the title. So the title of this is Akambi et al. 2021. So I'm going to pick it up here. Akambi et al. in 2021. Right? Now, so when you look at this, what are the possible gaps looking at this? It was conducted in 2021. So we can say no recent updates, or it was conducted in 2021 visually, because when we are recording our gaps, we're also using some form of subjective judgment in our in our decision. So what is the type of population here? Teenage pregnancy. So you come to the paper, right? So score why teenage fertility has remained high in women, this sample of female teenagers. So it involved what? Female teenagers were extracted from energies. This. Now, if you look at this study, you will realize that some of these teenagers were not from NDHS. So it was a large sample size, but it was not more cross-sectional. Right? There are already gaps that we can see. What do we mean by gap in literature here? What we mean by gap in literature is what does he point out here that you feel is different from literature, right? So the type of intervention might not really be necessary, like I said, depending on your research question, right? Some of the headings might seem not to be appropriate. So yeah, what's the methodology and what's the paradigm? This is clearly a quantitative study, because we can see statistics already littered around it, right? And it takes some. So it's a quantitative study. The design. What is the design gap? Remember that then remember in our considerations, looked at design, methodological gap, and all that. So here I looked at maybe followed retrospective design, right? What is the method of data analysis? What method of data analysis can we point out from the study? Remember, it's also expected for you to read the full text, so to get all the full information. So maybe when we look at the design, the method of data analysis might be, maybe it might have used maybe if you've read the full text, for example, it might have used the cross-sectional analysis, or it used the descriptive and inferential. But I can't see any inferential analysis there. This is descriptive analysis. Study setting was in Nigeria. So what are the possible gaps now that we can post from here now is that number one, didn't focus, maybe it used descriptive analysis without establishing association. That is inferential analysis, right? So you can also look at it from another point. It wasn't qualitative and all that, which is already something, but from what it has done, what are some of the limitations or some of the things that you believe? You can read this article and you can see that this article has not done. That is what it is. But remember that we're looking at it from the standpoint of both any type of studies, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that this is not a systematic review. So if it was going to be a systematic review, let's say, for example, we are doing gap identification for systematic review, and we've just gone to PubMed, right? And we've searched for teenage, for example. This is not how to do a proper search pregnancy in Nigeria, right? And we've set our filter towards systematic review. So it means that, for example, now, this is not how to, like I said, this is not how to put this search strategy for this. We'll explain that in detail. Now, and we want to do our gap identification. It doesn't mean that we'll have to now start looking at primary studies and that. No, we'll only do gap identification for systematic reviews based on existing reviews. Gap identification for meta-analysis, right? Or for meta-analysis based on existing meta-analysis. Gap identification for primary cross-sectional studies that you want to do. Or for primary studies, you want to conduct maybe your project, you want to choose a topic, and you want to identify gaps. It is only going to be based on primary studies that has been conducted. So you try and look at what are that place you have in mind. Has anybody gone there? Has that study been done? Is this something that just finished recently? You want to do it again? It is what it is. That is just it. So when we take a look at the outcomes from the stated paper here, right, we also realize that maybe focused on family planning, some certain variables that you can put down on your outcome here. So some of the limitations, some studies do report their limitations, and there could be other reasons, like I said, because the domains here might not really give you the full satisfaction of what you want to explore as your maybe gap in literature, right? Then it is now here that you will now come up with possible titles. Oh, this look at influence. That means, can we now look at prevalence of maybe teenage pregnancy among adolescents in Zambia? Maybe the only maybe from here, maybe in Ghana. Following your full assessment, because you have to make detailed comments of each particular information you pick from the paper. So let's assume these are all systematic reviews, right? So this one took for this. So we open this paper, right? So this focused on Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria. So the gap is you want the one that focus only on Nigeria and not maybe on effect and all that. Remember that in systematic review, the idea is that while we are searching, we are making sure we are also making sure that there are relevant primary studies that are going to be out there for us to do to perform. I didn't really want to delve into research strategy, so I don't really make it confusing or a bit, but I just wanted to make it clear here that this gap identification checklist is for you to go through as many papers as possible, right? To make sure you come up with what reasons why what you believe is already in literature that you now want to explore. So you can now search it. So that is why we can now come up with our possible question here after I have done my own practical search that what are the determinants of teenage pregnancy in Nigeria seems not to be exist. For example, now, as it was the current systematic review on. So this previous was 2010. So I'm now trying to explore this at 2024. If you're watching this video in the future, of when this video was being recorded. So that is just that's all what we need to really understand. Right. So we try to record our reasons, get as much papers as possible. But in our next section, we'll play with search strategy, we'll play with a lot of terms. But for now, I don't know, I just want to keep it at this page so we don't really start entering into such terms and not get so confused. So I'm going to just have a rundown of everything I've talked about tonight. I started by talking about gap, where I said that gap is just all about what is not in existence in the research and what is yet to be seen, right? And we move down to these images. I said that systematic review gap is just areas where within the literature that where evidence is either missing or contradicting, or there seems to be quite some limitations inside of there. And then I'll now explain the systematic review rationale, as the justification of why a systematic review is needed. Now I'm going to just have a glimpse of that systematic review rationale. Let's use OpenAI to just write that out to have a clear understanding of what I mean by that. Right? So I could just put this, I could say, discuss the, using our citation references, discuss the rationale for the I'll now go by saying, so let's just show an example of what the text should be, right? So because I'm just going to say develop that. So I could just put in my prompts or in, you don't use AI citing. So now, what am I trying to explain with this prompt that I just put inside of here? What I'm trying to explain is that the rationale for conducting systematic review on timelines, right, is the urgent that pregnancy poses countries' socio-economic and health is the urgent public health concern that teenage pregnancy poses for the country's socio-economic and health care system. Teenage pregnancy remains a significant issue as it's associated with increased risk of maternal and infant, right? So it starts with the problem, and this public health issue is particularly critical in Nigeria, where cultural existing studies have largely focused on health and economic outcomes of teenage pregnancy. Remember, this now means by then you should have recorded them in your gap identification search, and that is where you can now start. You can cite some of the previous existing studies here in this line. Or let's copy this and bring it out. Let's bring it out to text here. All right, so this just so here. So this is an example for the sake of this session. So these studies have largely focused on economic pregnancy, but there is noticeable gap. This is what we're talking about in comprehensive research, exploring the wide ranges of the timeline, socio-cultural norms, access to this. So this is existing studies here should come with previous references. Why previous studies such as that by Akinyemi et al. And this, right, have examined isolated factors such as this. These studies often overlook the interplay of multi-dimensional understanding that collectively contribute. So literally all this would come from your review. This gap necessitates a systematic review that integrates these factors to offer a holistic understanding of the phenomenon, which is critical for designing more effective intervention. Furthermore, there is need. So you tell us why. So here now we talk about why is your systematic review important, right? So by conducting this review, this obligatory synthesis and evidence, and then so that is just what it is. It is what it is. So now also remember that after we've addressed the rationale, right, why it should be done and what gap is there, because we're not talking about rationale, we're actually associating it with gaps in literature, right? So we now have to take into consideration in identifying gaps. So another trick is, you can actually come up with, play around with these terms, right? When you're coming up with your titles, because like I said, you can come up with a billion topics. And when you now do a concentrated search on those your studies, on those your topics, right? You record what are the similar topics that you found, and you're largely good to go. So we talked about interventions also. We looked at location, study setting, diversity of intake actually post gaps, outcomes, study designs, methodologies, um, comparison groups, duration of study, health condition, healthcare providers, cultural context, and bias and facilitators, depending on the context of the question, policy and practice, time duration, measurement tools, theoretical frameworks. Then we had a look at the gap identification framework and the Boolean search method, which is going to be discussed in terms of search strategy, and we've got practice exercise, which I'm going to send to us. So I want to use this opportunity to really thank each and every one of you for having this session. In our next session, we'll start with database searching, where we'll blow into full-blown practicals. I already have a topic that I'm going to choose to work with to the very end. Where at the end of it, I'll have my manuscript, and I also join you while you're done with this assessment. You should also come up with your own topic so that we can actually be able to do that. So I want to say a very big thank you very, 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 very much for your time